Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We are diving into some pretty radical ideas today, ideas about how we can build a better future, a future that is more just, more spiritual, and, well, more amazing for everyone.
And we're going to be looking at these ideas through the lens of Prout.
Exactly. Prout, P-R-O-U-T. It's a socioeconomic philosophy developed by Shrii Prabhat, Ranjan, Sarkar. And it's got some seriously mind-blowing concepts that really challenge the way we think about, well, pretty much everything.
It really does. And what I find so fascinating is that Prout doesn't just point out the problems with our current systems. It offers a real blueprint for a better future. A future that might seem kind of out there at first, but when you look closer, it's deeply rooted in a deep understanding of human potential.
Okay, so let's jump right into one of those mind-blowing concepts.
Sounds good.
Cosmic inheritance. This one blew my mind when I first read about it. It's the idea that the universe belongs to everyone, equally.
It's like we're all part of this giant cosmic family sharing the abundance of existence.
And that really changes how we think about things like ownership and resources, right?
It totally reframes it. It's like, think about the air we breathe, the sunlight that gives us life. No one owns those things.
Right, but they sustain us all.
Exactly. And Prout applies that same logic to, well, to material resources too. Like, instead of clinging to this idea of individual ownership, we become like stewards. We're responsibly using what we need, but for the well-being of everyone.
Okay, so that makes sense when you're talking about air and sunlight. But how does that apply to something like land ownership? I mean, that's a huge source of conflict in our world.
Well, Sarkar had some pretty radical ideas about land reform.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he advocated for a system where those who are actually working the land, directly, they're the ones entitled to a share of the produce.
Interesting. So it's not just about who owns the land on paper, but who's actually using it and who's benefiting from it.
Exactly. It challenges those really deep-seated notions of private property. Like, what if our current systems of ownership are actually holding us back from a more equitable and, sustainable future?
Okay, so we've talked about individual ownership. But what about those big isms that dominate so much of our world? Nationalism, capitalism, socialism. Sarkar wasn't a big fan of any of those, was he?
He wasn't. He saw these ideologies as ultimately divisive. They tend to prioritize, the interests of a particular group over the well-being of humanity as a whole.
Like nationalism, for instance.
Yeah, with its focus on national borders and, and identities.
Right.
It often fuels conflict. It makes it hard to address the really big global challenges.
And this is where Sarkar's idea of a world government comes in, right?
You got it. It might seem radical, but he genuinely believed it was essential for creating a more unified and peaceful world.
And a world with a universal language, right? I mean, that's a bold vision.
He even suggested English as a contender, too. Imagine everyone could understand each other. Think about the potential for collaboration and just a deeper understanding between cultures.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine resolving conflicts through dialogue instead of resorting to violence. But wouldn't a world government, wouldn't that just create this massive centralized power structure? How do we prevent that from becoming tyrannical?
That's a really important question, and Sarkar actually addressed that directly. He proposed this bicameral legislature for the world government. So one house would represent populations, and the other would represent individual nations.
Okay, so like checks and balances.
Exactly. It ensures that smaller nations have a voice and that power isn't just concentrated in the hands of, a few. It's about finding that balance between individual and collective needs. And that extends to Prout's economic model, too.
And this is where things get really interesting, right? Prout's economic model, it's not purely capitalist, socialist, or communist. It's this blend of individual enterprise, cooperatives, and government control of key industries.
Right? It takes what Sarkar saw as the best parts of these different systems and kind of mashes them together into something totally new.
So what are the key principles behind this economic model?
Decentralization is a big one. Prout aims to create these self-sufficient economic units to minimize exploitation and ensure that resources are distributed more equitably. Imagine local communities having more control over their economies, producing and consuming goods and services locally.
I mean, that sounds amazing, but wouldn't that lead to less efficiency, maybe even less innovation if everything's so localized?
Not necessarily. Sarkar believed that real progress is about maximizing human happiness and well-being, not just, economic output.
So it's not just about making more stuff. It's about creating a system where people can thrive. But how do you incentivize people to work hard and contribute in this kind of collective economic model?
Prout proposes things like piecework and bonus systems to incentivize productivity.
Okay, so people are still rewarded for their efforts.
Exactly. It's about encouraging people to develop their skills and, their talents.
Right, so you're not getting rid of individual ambition. You're kind of like channeling it towards the common good.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of innovation, we have to talk about rationalization. A lot of people today are worried about, automation and technology replacing jobs. But Prout has a very different perspective on this.
Okay, so what is Prout's take on technology? Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Prout sees technological advancement as essential. But instead of fearing job losses, Sarkar saw it as an opportunity to reduce working hours for everyone.
Wait, so more automation means more free time.
Imagine having more time for, personal pursuits, spending time with loved ones, creative expression, even spiritual exploration.
I mean, sign me up. That sounds amazing. But how do we make sure that everyone's needs are still being met if we're all working less?
That's where this idea of a well-managed collective economy comes in. It's about making sure that technology serves the needs of the people, not just corporate profits.
Okay, so we've got this vision of a decentralized economy with people working less but still having their needs met. But who's going to guide this new society? Who are the leaders in this Prout world?
Well, that's where this really interesting idea of Sidvipras comes in. They're kind of like spiritual revolutionaries, I guess you could say.
Spiritual revolutionaries. What does that even mean?
Well, these are individuals who embody the highest ethical principles. They guide society with wisdom and compassion.
So they're not like traditional politicians or religious leaders as we know them.
Right. They're more like, influential figures who inspire others through their knowledge, their character, and their dedication to the well-being of all.
Okay, so it's not about power or control. It's about leadership rooted in service and a deep understanding of human potential.
Exactly.
That's a beautiful concept. But how do these Sidvipras, how do they actually gain influence and guide society?
Sarkar believed that they could come to prominence through, he called it an intellectual revolution, persuading people through their wisdom and insights, or maybe a more active revolution where they challenge corrupt systems. He said it depends on how society responds to their message.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about adapting to the circumstances and using whatever means are necessary to create a more just world. It's about being the change, right? But also being willing to fight for that change when you have to.
You got it. And the Sidvipras, they embody that principle, leading by example and inspiring others to join the movement for a better future. So we've got this vision of a future society guided by these spiritually evolved individuals, rooted in those principles of cosmic inheritance. But how does Prout address the social problems we're facing right now? Things like poverty and inequality.
Yeah, those are big ones.
Right. And Prout doesn't shy away from them. It offers real, concrete solutions.
Okay, so give me an example. How would Prout address something like prostitution?
Instead of criminalizing it, Prout seeks to eliminate the need for it altogether. Empower women economically, provide them with other opportunities, create a society where they don't have to resort to that to survive.
So, address the root causes. What about the dowry system? That's still prevalent in a lot of places.
Prout encourages intercaste and even international marriages. Break down those barriers, promote diversity. The idea is that that outdated traditions like dowry will eventually become irrelevant in a more balanced and equitable society.
Interesting. And what about population growth? A lot of people see that as a problem, but does Prout?
Prout actually has a really optimistic view of population growth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sarkar believed that more people means more minds, right? More minds to contribute to innovation and progress.
So it's not a problem if we have the resources to support a growing population.
Exactly. It's about managing those resources wisely and making sure that everyone has access to what they need to thrive.
Okay, so Prout is painting this picture of a future society that's very different from the world we live in today. But I have to ask, is it realistic? Is Prout really achievable? Or is it just some beautiful, impossible dream?
Prout definitely challenges conventional thinking, but it's not about ignoring reality. Sarkar was very practical. He knew that change takes time and effort, and he offered a clear path forward.
So it's not about waiting for some perfect moment or for someone else to fix everything.
Right. It's about each of us doing what we can right now to create change, whether that's volunteering, donating to a cause we believe in, speaking out against injustice. It all makes a difference.
It's about remembering that our choices matter, right? That we have the power to influence the world around us.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most profound aspects of Prout, its perspective on peace.
Okay, yeah, Sarkar had a very, how do I put this? A very unique take on peace.
He did. He rejected passive pacifism. He famously said, "Fight is the essence of life, and peace can be restored only after fight."
Okay, that sounds a little intense. Was he advocating for violence?
No, not at all. Sarkar strongly believed in nonviolent resistance as the primary means of social change. But he recognized that sometimes, to overcome injustice, you have to struggle.
Right, whether that's challenging corrupt systems, defending human rights, whatever it may be.
You got it. He believed that true peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it comes from resolving conflict. He called it sentient peace.
So it's about actively working towards peace, not just hoping for it.
Exactly, and recognizing that progress often involves those challenges.
Conflict can be a catalyst for positive change if we approach it the right way.
Exactly. So how do we actually move from where we are now to this world that Sarkar envisioned?
Yeah, how do we actually make this happen? Where do we even begin?
Well, Sarkar outlined a three-phase approach. It's a mix of intellectual revolution, social activism, and political engagement.
Okay, so break it down for me. What do these phases look like?
Phase 1 is all about education and race awareness, spreading Prout's ideas through study circles, literature, dialogue, planting those seeds of change in people's minds.
So phase 1 is about laying the groundwork, but how do we move beyond just talking about these ideas?
That's phase 2, amplifying the message, taking it to a wider audience through public platforms, rallies, protests, getting people mobilized. Building momentum.
So it's about sparking conversations and inspiring action.
Right. And then phase 3 is about turning that momentum into real, tangible action, supporting those sadvipras in democratic processes, creating change within existing systems, fighting corruption and injustice.
So it's about taking those inspiring ideas and turning them into concrete actions. It's a holistic approach, right? Addressing both individual consciousness and the systems that shape our world.
Exactly. But of course, a transformation this radical, it's going to face some serious resistance. People who benefit from the status quo, they're not going to give up their power easily.
So how do we overcome that resistance? I mean, it sounds like an uphill battle.
It is. But Prout emphasizes the importance of courage, perseverance, and a deep belief in the possibility of a better world. And remember, history is full of examples of seemingly impossible social transformations that happened because people dared to imagine something different.
That's such a powerful reminder. It's like Prout is giving us permission to dream big and to believe that a radically different future is actually possible.
That's exactly it. It's about becoming architects of our own destiny, shaping a future that reflects our highest aspirations, and building a world that's worthy of our shared humanity.
And that's the amazing thing about Prout. It's not just some theory, It gives us tools we can actually use to create change.
We've been talking about this big picture of, a transformed society, but I'm also thinking about how Prout applies to our everyday lives. Like, how would it actually impact me as an individual?
That's a good question. And Prout says that individual and collective change go hand in hand, right? We can't have a just and equitable society if we're not also working on ourselves. Okay, so it's not just about changing the systems around us. It's also about inner transformation. But how do you actually cultivate that inner change?
Well, that's where these ethical principles, yama and niyama, come in. They're these ancient yogic principles, and they give us guidelines for, living in alignment with our highest potential. Things like honesty, nonviolence, compassion, self-discipline.
Right, those are pretty universal values. But how do those actually translate into real-world actions?
I mean, think about how those principles could shape how you interact with others, right? Do you approach conflict with understanding, with a willingness to find common ground? Do you try to be kind and compassionate even when it's hard? Do you make choices that actually reflect your values?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. It's about being more mindful, more intentional in how we live our lives.
Exactly. And it's not about being perfect. It's about recognizing that, we're all on this journey. Every moment gives us a chance to learn, to become more aware, and to live more consciously.
Yeah, and that takes the pressure off, right? It's not about being perfect. It's about trying to be better.
Right, for ourselves and for everyone around us. And when we cultivate these qualities within ourselves, it naturally creates a more harmonious and compassionate society.
It's like that ripple effect we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Our actions, even the small ones, they have an impact.
So it's not just about changing the systems. It's also about changing ourselves and trusting that those personal transformations will actually contribute to the larger picture.
You got it. It's this beautiful dance between individual and collective effort. We can't just wait for someone else to create a better world. It starts with each of us taking responsibility.
I mean, that's inspiring, but some of this might sound a bit radical, a bit idealistic, right? Is Prout really achievable? Or is it just a nice dream?
Prout challenges the way we usually think about things, that's for sure. But Sarkar was also a pragmatist. He knew that change takes work. He knew it takes time. And he gave us a roadmap.
Okay, so it's not about waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect leader to come along. It's about each of us doing what we can right here, right now.
Yeah, and that can look so many different ways, you know? It could be volunteering, it could be donating to a cause you care about, maybe it's speaking out against injustice. Even just having those tough conversations with people, you know?
Right, having those conversations that need to be had, even when they're uncomfortable.
Exactly. Sometimes that's the most important work we can do. We often hear this message that, like, our individual actions don't really matter, but Prout is saying the opposite. It's saying our choices do matter.
Yeah, we're not just cogs in a machine. We have the power to shape the world around us.
And every choice we make, every action we take, it all adds up.
Okay, so Prout encourages this blend of personal and collective transformation. But what are the biggest challenges to actually putting these ideas into practice?
One of the biggest is those power structures, those vested interests. Anytime you're talking about redistributing wealth and power, you're going to hit some serious resistance.
Yeah, that's human nature, right?
But it's also about those deep-seated beliefs and attitudes, those cultural things that keep inequality going. That's a tough one to crack.
So how do we change those beliefs and attitudes? How do we shift the culture?
It takes education, it takes dialogue, and it takes a willingness to challenge those harmful ideas that are out there. It's about fostering critical thinking, empathy.
Yeah, and having those tough conversations we were talking about. It's about being willing to listen, even when we don't agree.
Exactly. And Prout says we should approach these conversations with compassion. Sarkar believed that most people, even those who, perpetuate these harmful systems, they're doing it out of ignorance or maybe fear. It's about addressing the root cause, not just blaming people.
So it's about creating a world where everyone feels safe, respected, valued. That's a beautiful vision. But sometimes, I gotta admit, the world feels pretty bleak. How do we stay hopeful when there's so much suffering?
That's where Prout's belief in our capacity for goodness comes in. Sarkar believed we are capable of love, compassion, cooperation. He saw these things as strengths, not weaknesses.
It's like deep down, we all want that better world, right?
And Prout gives us a way to get there. It's about creating a society that reflects those aspirations, a society where everyone can reach their potential.
Okay, so we've talked about the hopeful, the inspiring, even the challenging parts of Prout. But there's one thing I wanted to bring up. It's a bit mind-boggling, almost like sci-fi. Sarkar talked about a future where, get this, minds are created in labs.
Right. It's one of the more futuristic ideas, for sure. But Sarkar was really into that intersection of science and spirituality. He saw technology as a tool for evolution.
But creating minds in labs, doesn't it raise some big ethical questions? Like, what does it mean to be human?
Those are the right questions, and we need to be having those conversations now. As technology gets more and more advanced, we have to think about the consequences.
So it's not just about what's possible. It's about making sure we're using technology in a way that's ethical, that helps us rather than hurts us.
Exactly. And this idea of creating minds in labs, it makes us think about what is consciousness? How can we use technology to better understand ourselves and the universe?
Those are huge questions.
And that's what I love about Prout. It doesn't shy away from the big questions. It encourages us to keep asking them and to imagine a future that's as big as our potential.
You know, for a philosophy that's often called radical, Prout's actually really optimistic. It's like it's saying, we can do this. We can build a better world.
And that's the key difference between Prout and a lot of other movements. It's not just about tearing things down. It's about building something better. It's about believing in that brighter future and actually doing the work to make it real.
It really is amazing how Prout balances these, like, grand futuristic ideas with a really practical approach to creating change.
That's why it still resonates with people today. It speaks to our heads and our hearts, It makes you think, but it also inspires you to, live a more meaningful life.
Yeah, I can see that. But for someone who's just learning about Prout for the first time, it might feel a little overwhelming. Like, where do you even start? How do you actually put these ideas into practice?
That's a common question. And the cool thing about Prout is that there's no one right way to be a Proutist, It's more about living in alignment with those core principles: social justice, spiritual growth, respect for all beings.
So it's not about following some strict dogma or anything like that.
Right. It's about embodying those values in your daily life and your relationships, your work, how you interact with your community, everything.
Okay, but let's say someone is feeling inspired by this, but also a little lost. What would you suggest as a starting point?
I always say start by looking inward. What are your values? What are you passionate about? What are your unique skills and talents? Once you have a better understanding of yourself and what drives you, you can start looking for ways to get involved. Find those movements, those organizations, those initiatives that resonate with you.
Find that place where your passions and the needs of the world intersect.
Exactly. And there are countless ways to make a difference. You could volunteer, donate, speak out against injustice. You could even just start having conversations with your friends and family about these things.
It's about remembering that even small actions can create ripples, right?
Absolutely. Every act of kindness, every choice we make that's aligned with our values, it all contributes to a better world.
So we don't have to wait for the perfect moment or for someone else to lead the way. We can start making a difference right now.
That's the spirit. And it's okay if we don't have all the answers, you know? What matters is that we show up with an open heart, that we're willing to learn and grow, and that we're committed to creating a world where everyone can thrive.
I love that. It's like we're all works in progress, but we can still be forces for good in the world.
And as we continue to learn and grow individually and collectively, we create the conditions for that just and equitable world to emerge.
Well, we're just about out of time for this deep dive into Prout, but before we go, is there one final thought-provoking question you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something we didn't explicitly discuss, but that's been on your mind as we've been talking about all this.
You know, that idea of cosmic inheritance, it really got me thinking. If the universe belongs to everyone equally, then shouldn't that include future generations? You know, the people who haven't even been born yet.
Wow, yeah.
What is our responsibility to them? How do we make sure they inherit a world that's sustainable, just, and full of possibilities? It's a question I think Prout really pushes us to consider.
It's a big question, for sure. It makes us think about the long-term consequences of our actions.
It does. It reminds us that building a better future isn't just about us. It's about leaving a legacy of well-being and opportunity for generations to come.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Lots for our listeners to ponder. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into Prout.
It's been my pleasure. I hope it sparked some new ideas and inspired some folks to explore these concepts further.
And to everyone listening, keep those conversations going, keep questioning, keep dreaming, keep acting, and keep believing in the possibility of that better world. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, stay curious.